Chapter 58. Napoleon. Religion is what keeps the poor from murdering the rich. Napoleon. It has taken me a while to digest my last meeting with Lialeb, as I couldn't stop thinking about everything that he told me. How can purpose, fulfillment, and satisfaction in life be found? Given the gods created humanity in their image, this means that we are more like gods than we are like anything else. So what's the significance of life, or our existence in general? What is the purpose of life? Alternatively, going further, does life exist at all? Moreover, why, while on Earth, do we have such a fear of death? Scientists on Earth argue about the origins and ultimate fate of the universe. They agree that the Big Bang should be the prevalent cosmological model for the earliest known periods of the universe. Although it explains how the universe expanded, the Big Bang theory does not provide any explanation for the initial conditions of the universe. It would be much easier if, while on Earth, we could remember the learning place or the scanning place. Here we know the truth. Everything was created by the gods and by the demiurge, and all the souls on Earth are an intimate part of this. I saw Lialeb coming into the library. Once more I felt so filled with joy that I couldn't help running to him. "Hi, Lialeb," I said with a broad smile.
"Hello, Myra. You seem to be very happy today," Lialeb answered.
"Yes, I am. I've been thinking about everything you told me at our last meeting, and now things would make much more sense to me," I told him.
"I'm pleased to hear that, Myra, because you're going to need all you have learned for your next trip," Lialeb said.
"I have been researching about Napoleon, and I am extremely excited about this trip," I confided.
"Before you go, I want to explain and share some of the characteristics and circumstances surrounding Napoleon that may make him in some instances comparable to Hitler."
"Comparable to Hitler?" I asked, surprised.
"Yes, Myra. Even though Hitler's and Napoleon's existences on Earth took place over a century apart, they were very close. When Hitler was born, Napoleon had already been dead for 78 years. However, Hitler admired Napoleon and wanted to be like him. Hitler followed a quote from Napoleon: "You don't reason with intellectuals, you shoot them." And both of them did that. Hitler was German but born in Austria. Napoleon was born in Corsica and not a Frenchman. Both of them were considered foreigners to the nations they ruled over. Adolf Hitler and Napoleon both rose to power dramatically, but both of them became dictators afterwards. Hitler and Napoleon invaded the majority of the European nations through a series of wars, plus campaigns in North Africa. One of the most striking similarities is related to the dates in which they invaded Russia. Napoleon invaded Russia on June 24, 1812, which numerologically is 6-2-4-1-8-1. 2 equals 24. 2 plus 4, 6. While Hitler invaded Russia on June 22, 1941, which reads 6-2-2-1-9-4-1 equals 25. 2 plus 5 equals 7. Napoleon's number for the invasion of Russia was 24, or number 6, 2, 4, 6. Hitler's invasion of Russia 129 years later was number 25, becoming number 7, 2 plus 5, 7. It is amazing to see a combination of numbers like 24 for Napoleon, and then 129 years later for 25 for Hitler. A perfect numerical continuation. Both of them invaded Russia, and both of them faced defeat by the same general, General Winter. Hitler admired Napoleon so much that he was not able to realize all the mistakes that Napoleon had made while trying to conquer Russia. And for both of them, the Russian invasion was a turning point, leading to their downfalls. Also, they both signed a concordant with the Catholic Church to buy the Church's silence for their actions. Both of them were born Catholics, one of the main religions of the light, Lialeb explained.
"Lila, I'm overwhelmed," I admitted.
"I don't want you to be overwhelmed. I want you to remember what I just told you, and applying it to finding the right card and the right commandment for the darkness," Lilab said, smiling.
"Okay, Lilab, I'm ready to go."
"Pay attention to the relationship between Napoleon and Josephine," Lilab instructed.
"Okay. Any particular reason for me to do that?" I wondered.
"You will find there are some answers you have been looking for," Lilab answered.
"Okay, I will stay alert," I agreed, somewhat surprised. We walked through the hall of the scanning place leading into the time-traveling room. Once more the big screen appeared before me. Suddenly I was flying once again into the past, and I was in the town of Ajaccio, the capital of the island of Corsica. The year was 1769. Corsica was in the middle of the Corsican crisis, and Britain failed to intervene. The Corsican crisis faced destruction, and in the following year, 1770, Corsica was formally annexed as a province of France. Technically, Napoleon was born into another country, still not formally a part of France. Let's go back to the date of birth of Napoleon, August 15th, 1769. We add the numbers, 8 plus 1 plus 5 plus 1 plus 7 plus 6 plus 9 equals 37. 3 plus 7 equals 10, which equals 1. The number of a leader, number 1. I could hear baby Napoleon crying, and I could read his mind. He was thinking, "If you want a thing done well, do it yourself." Well, Napoleon was coming into this battlefield to do things well and to do them by himself. The Corsican Bonapartes were descendants of a minor Italian nobility of Tuscan origin, who had migrated to Corsica from Liguria in the 16th century. His father Carlo was a lawyer, and his mother, Letizia Ramolino, had a significant influence on young Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon's noble, affluent family afforded him great opportunities to study that was not available to a typical Corsican at the time. In 1779, when Napoleon was 10 years old, he was enrolled at a religious school in Autun, in mainland France, and it was there that he learned French. A few months later, the military army at Braine-le-Château admitted him. Napoleon always spoke with a heavy Corsican accent, and unfortunately he never learned to speak French properly. I can see young Napoleon being teased by other students for his accent. He suffered in school, but he was planning as a revenge. Napoleon once said, "There are but two powers in the world, the sword and the mind. In the long run, the mind beats the sword." Did he truly believe that? On completion of his studies at Brienne in 1784, Napoleon enrolled in the famous École Militaire. Upon graduating in 1785, he was 16 years old, and Napoleon was commissioned as a second lieutenant in Valence and Action until the outbreak of the French Revolution in 1789. Napoleon took a 2-year leave and moved to Corsica. He then became a staunch Corsican nationalist. While in Corsica, he found himself in a very complicated situation. He was in the middle of a 3-way struggle among royalists, revolutionaries, and Corsican nationalists. Napoleon supported the revolutionary Jacobin faction and gained the rank of lieutenant colonel in the Corsican militia. Despite exceeding his leave of absence, he was promoted to captain in the regular French army in July 1792. In returning to Corsica, he came into conflict with Corsican independence leader Pascal Pioli, who had decided to split from France. Bonaparte and his family then decided to leave Corsica and return to France in June 1793. In July of that year, Napoleon published a pro-Republican pamphlet named Supper at Beaucaire. The brochure got the attention of Augustin Robespierre, younger brother of the revolutionary leader Maximilien Robespierre. Napoleon became the artillery commander of the Republican army at the siege of Toulon. He adopted a very original and risky plan to take over a hill from which his artillery could dominate the city's harbor. The idea was a success, and the British troops helping the rebels had to flee Toulon. Napoleon was wounded in the thigh during the assault to take the city. He gained promotion after his victory to brigadier general at the age of 24. Napoleon was a general at 24, the youngest ever, not only in European history, but in world history. The general once said, "The battle is a scene of constant chaos. The winner will be the one who controls the chaos, both his own and the enemy's. Ability is nothing without opportunity, because nothing is more difficult, and therefore more precious than to be able to decide. Victory belongs to the most persevering." After the fall of Robespierre and the Thermidorian reaction in 1794, Napoleon received questioning for his association with the Robespierre brothers. However, he was freed of any wrongdoings and became in charge of drawing up plans to attack Italian positions in the context of France's war with Austria. The French Revolution continued, and in October 1795, Royalists in Paris declared a rebellion against the National Convention, which Napoleon received a command to defend. He then ordered Joachim Murat to seize large cannons and use them to repel the attackers on October 5, 1795. It was a brutal massacre. More than 1,400 Royalists died, and the rest fled. Napoleon cleared the streets with a whiff of grape shot. As a result, he gained sudden fame, wealth, and the admiration of the new government, the Directory. Suddenly, love called at the door of Napoleon, and he fell in love with Josephine Beauharnais. They married on March 9, 1796. I couldn't help but add the numbers. 3, 9, 1, 7, 9, 6 equals 35. 3 plus 8 equals 8. Number 8, which is unfortunate for marriage, as there's too much instability. However, Napoleon was indeed in love. As he said, "Sweet and incomparable Josephine, what an extraordinary influence you have over my heart. Are you vexed? Do I see you sad, or are you ill at ease? My soul breaks with grief, and there is no rest for your lover. However, is there more for me when, delivering ourselves up to the deep feelings which master me, I breathe out upon your lips, upon your heart, a flow which burns me up so? It was this last night I realized that your portrait was not you. I shall see you in 3 hours. Meanwhile, my dolce amor, accept 1,000 kisses. I will give no more, for the fire in my blood." Well, Napoleon was really in love. However, can a monster fall in love? Was Napoleon a monster or only a man in love? And if the latter, then one will do anything for love. Was Napoleon going to conquer Europe just for France, Josephine, or himself? Just 2 days after he married Josephine, Napoleon left Paris to take command of the French army in Italy. When Napoleon arrived, the French army was undersupplied and demoralized. At the time, the French Revolutionary Directorate did not consider the Italian front a priority, as southern Germany was the primary concern. Nevertheless, Napoleon immediately went on the offensive, and he took over Piedmont in just 2 weeks. Then Napoleon's next target was the Austrians, and his victory at Rivoli in January 1797 ended with the collapse of the Austrian position in Italy. The war continued with many victories for Napoleon, finally ending with the Treaty of Campo Formio, very favorable to France's interest. During this time, Napoleon missed Josephine very much. He once said, "My wife Josephine, away from you there is no more joy. The world is a wilderness in which I stand alone, and without experiencing the bliss of unburdening my soul. You have robbed me of more than my soul. You are the only thought of my life." Napoleon once said, "You have robbed me of my soul." I wonder what he meant with these words. More than my soul? Can you rob anybody of their soul? One way to lose one's soul is to give it to someone, as people indeed in love will give portions of their soul to their loved ones. However, people who give away a piece of their soul disempower themselves. The giver's life becomes more and more difficult because they're not fully present in the current moment. Did Napoleon give Josephine the loving part of his soul and keep the brutal part for the rest of the world? Why was Napoleon ready to risk his future and the future of France for a woman? I don't know yet whose Napoleon's soul was. However, who was Josephine's soul? Was she a soul from the light trying to interfere in Napoleon's mission? Further on, Napoleon became increasingly influential in French politics. Then suddenly he had a great idea. He founded 2 newspapers, one for his troops and another one for the circulation in France. Napoleon's next target was Britain. However, he decided that France's naval power was not strong enough to confront Britain. Instead of fighting the United Kingdom, Napoleon decided to invade Egypt, and thereby undermine Britain's access to trade in India. He wrote, "Having occupied and fortified Egypt, we shall now send a force of 15,000 men from Suez to India to join the forces of Tupar Sahib and drive away from the British." Napoleon reached Alexandria on July 1st, 1798. I added the numbers. 7111798 equals 33. A master number 33. Napoleon was bound for a mystical journey to Egypt, and he fought the Battle of the Pyramids 3 weeks later. 29 Frenchmen and more than 2,000 Egyptians died in this battle. This victory dramatically boosted the morale of the French troops. However, not everything was going to be as the French general expected, as 11 days later the British, led by Admiral Nelson, defeated the French in the Battle of the Nile, destroying Napoleon's goal of strengthening the French position in the Mediterranean. In early 1799, Napoleon's army reached Damascus, then an Ottoman province. Napoleon continued his war into Gaza, Jaffa, and Haifa. The results of the Battle of Haifa were brutal, as Napoleon ordered the execution of 1,400 prisoners. Then women and children were robbed, raped, and murdered for 3 days. Napoleon once stated and believed that courage is not having the strength to continue. Rather, it is continuing when one does not have the strength. Napoleon's army grew weak due to disease, due mostly to bubonic plague and improper supplies. He thus decided to retreat, and Napoleon, to speed up the retreat, ordered his plague-stricken men to be poisoned. Back in Egypt, Napoleon became informed of European affairs. French troops faced defeat in Europe, and on August 24, 1799, he decided on his own, without the authorization of the Directory, to return to France. Finally, he was going back to Josephine. Napoleon once wrote to her, "I am sure and proud of your love. Misfortunes are the trials which reveal to each mutually the whole force of our passion. I will pass for many years in your arms, but I will be happy with just 1 day. 1,000 kisses on your eyes, your lips, your tongue, and your heart. What is your power over me? Do you remember my dream in which I was your boots, your dress, and in which I made you come bodily into my heart? To live without life, thinking of my Josephine, would be death and annihilation to your husband. Adieu, my well-beloved. A kiss on your mouth, another on your heart. See you soon, my love." Napoleon returned to France as a hero, and the first thing he did when he arrived in Paris was to see his love, Josephine. I can see when they saw each other that Napoleon took Josephine into his chambers, and after romantically kissing her, he told her something that no one else had ever heard. What I am going to say to you is going to be very difficult for you to believe. While I was in Egypt a few days after the Battle of the Pyramids, I decided to visit and investigate the Great Pyramid. We went into the Great Pyramid, and we reached the king's chamber. At this point, something happened to me. I felt something I couldn't explain, but I needed to be left alone in there and refrain from anything interrupting me during the whole night. I brought 2 candles with me inside the chamber. I lit one of them and waited. It was scorching in there, and I felt hostile forces surrounding me. I saw eerie shadows coming from all sides of the chamber, and one of them, a big shadow, was coming near me. I started thinking about all the legends of evil ghosts haunting the pyramids. Suddenly, a circle of monstrous elemental creatures surrounded me. They attacked me, but when I was in range, they disappeared. I was saved, but I did not want to leave the chamber, as I wanted to find its secrets. Soon afterwards, more phantoms of a different aspect appeared. They dressed as ancient Egyptian high priests, and they led me into 2 places through secret passages within the pyramid. One was named the Learning Place, and the other one was named the Scanning Place. Napoleon continued explaining to Josephine, "It was like a mystical journey within my mind. For a moment I felt paralyzed. I felt like my soul was leaving my body and visiting regions beyond death. I went through a narrow tunnel and became a purely mental being, and I felt like I have visited this place many times before. Suddenly I was in the king's chamber once again. I saw 2 shadowy figures approaching me, and I knew both of them. One was Cagliostro, whom I have met and admired and had tried to save from the prison of St. Leo. But when the French troops arrived there during my Italian campaign, Cagliostro had already faced murder. He was one of the symbols of our revolution. The other shadowy figure was the Count of Saint-Germain, whom I had previously known, and I thought he was still alive. I could hear music, sound reverberations, which was a very imposing sound. The 2 of them just stopped before me. 'Welcome to the Great Pyramid, Emperor,' Cagliostro said to me. 'Are you Cagliostro?' I asked Cagliostro. 'Yes, I am,' Cagliostro answered. 'But I thought you were dead,' I replied. 'I am dead, and death is what we want to talk to you about,' Cagliostro said. 'And Count of Saint-Germain, are you dead too?' I asked. 'I am not dead nor alive. I can come and go as I please. That is my mission,' Count Saint-Germain answered. 'Come with us,' Cagliostro said, as they led me through another secret passage. At the end of the hall there was a room with the 22 major arcana cards of the Egyptian tarot card. 'Do you know the Egyptian tarot, Emperor?' Count Saint-Germain asked Napoleon. 'I am more familiar with the tarot of Marseille, but I have seen the Egyptian tarot before,' Napoleon told him. 'You represent one of these 22 cards, Emperor,' Cagliostro said. 'I don't understand what you're trying to tell me, and I don't understand why you keep calling me Emperor either,' I announced. 'Because in 6 years from now you will be crowned by the Pope as the French Emperor,' Count Saint-Germain stated, as I possessed a face of amazement. I didn't know if I was going to be able to leave Egypt for Marseille, even less to think I was going to be Emperor of France. For a moment I thought that everything was a vision, because nothing made sense. 'What about the cards?' I asked. 'There is a game between the light and the darkness, and you are one of the most important cards of the darkness,' Cagliostro told me. Cagliostro and Count Saint-Germain explained the game to me, but they didn't want to give me too much information, as the rules of the game didn't allow it. Then the 2 showed Napoleon his downfall, which will occur in 14 years, 2 cycles of 7. They continued speaking to me and said he was one of the most influential and spiritual beings playing this game. Josephine is an essential part of the game as well, and she will have to fight the final battle for all of us in this game. When I asked them how will Josephine be involved in this game, they were unable to answer me, as it would violate the rules of the game. They led me back through the secret passage into the king's chamber, and then they disappeared. Suddenly another shadowy figure appeared before me. He told me, "I am your God." Next to him another shadow appeared too and said, "No, I am your God." Then another one, this time with a feminine voice, said, "No, I am your God." And subsequently 4 more figures appeared and told me the same thing. "I am your God, I am your God, I am your God." Then all of them at the same time yelled at me, "We are all your gods, the 7 gods of the rebellion against the one God." And then they disappeared. After that I decided to abandon the king's chamber. When I exited, my aides were waiting for me. I felt shaken, and one of my aides asked if I had witnessed anything mysterious. I told him that I had no comment, and that I did not want any of them to mention anything ever again about my night in the king's chamber, as I knew they would never believe me. Napoleon finished his explanation to Josephine. It is difficult to believe what Napoleon went through that night at the Great Pyramid. I couldn't find any information about that night in all my research in the library of the scanning place, where there are records of supposedly everything that ever happened on Earth. Did this meeting take place in another dimension? The Great Pyramid is precisely the measurement of the speed of light. The pyramid measures precisely the amount of time for a solar year. Is this the reason why it is unrecorded? Is the pyramid a parallel universe in which things take place but cannot be registered? I will have to ask Lileb when I return. After his death, did Cagliostro serve as Napoleon's guide? What was Napoleon referring to when he said to Josephine that she would have to play the final battle for the darkness? I have a strange feeling. Was I Josephine? Once again, everything seems so familiar to me. It's the exact words Lileb told me when I asked about my mission. If I was Josephine, who was Napoleon? Could it have been Lileb, better known as Belial? All the attraction and admiration that I have for him, was that part of this lifetime as Josephine? When I asked him if we could have been together in other lifetimes, he told me that I would have to find that out by myself. Were Napoleon and Josephine the answer to my question? Napoleon's words still resound in my mind. As for me, to love you alone, to make you happy, to do nothing which would contradict your wishes, this is my destiny and the meaning of my life. Was Lileb talking to me like that? Lileb and I have a lot to talk about when I come back. I then turned my attention back to Napoleon's life. First his years of glory, and then his dramatic downfall. Great ambition is the passion of a great character. Those endowed with it perform very good and very bad acts. All depends on the principles which direct them. The principles which direct them. Which laws, I wondered. Napoleon's principles, combined with his considerable political skills, led the French people to a new constitution that created the position of First Consul, which amounted to nothing less than a personal dictatorship. On November of that same year, 1799, the French people approved a new law naming Napoleon First Consul. As a result, the French leader will have the power to appoint ministers, generals, magistrates, and members of the Parliament or Assembly. Napoleon's popularity rose as he led his reforms into all areas, such as economy, education, welfare, and even reinstated Catholicism as the state religion. Finally, he established the Napoleonic Code, which terminated privileges based on birth, and allowed for the first time to give government jobs to the most qualified citizens, and not to the most privileged ones. He also permitted freedom of religion. Now, wait. I have to stop here. When I had my conversation with Lialib about his past incarnations, he told me that one of his most memorable ones was when he was Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan did precisely the same things as Napoleon did. Now there was no doubt in my mind that Napoleon was Lialib. He, like Napoleon, was trying to do what he did when he was Genghis Khan 5 centuries earlier, but this time in Europe. When we come back to Earth, do we try to do the same thing over and over again? Napoleon's reforms touched his people, and just 2 years later, in 1802, he was elected consul for life. In his personal life, he was still totally in love with me, Josephine. Your sweet face and form have not been absent a moment from my thoughts the whole day. You cannot possibly imagine my uneasiness if I left you vexed, annoyed, and not well. If the deepest and sincerest affection can make you happy, you ought to be. I feel worked to death. Adieu, my kind Josephine. Love me, keep well, and often, often think of me. When I look into this, I feel that I didn't play my part as Josephine well. Napoleon was battling for the darkness, and instead of helping him, I was giving him a hard time. Are we real when we are on Earth, or when we are here? I'm bewildered. Why was I sent by the darkness to be Napoleon's companion? What was my mission? Did I have any purpose? Was I here to help him and not mortify him? Why do we always see the truth when it's already too late? Why is it when we're here on Earth, we shame the people we love the most? Why is that? Can somebody explain that to me? Why have the gods created this world? Is it to play with us? Are we on Earth just for their amusement? Moreover, if so, why did the gods come to Earth to suffer? Lialib is one of the gods. Why would he go to Earth to suffer for the love of a woman? He was fighting battles, killing his enemies, but he could never be at peace because of me. How is it possible that our divine nature evaporates when we come to Earth? Life on Earth is a grand experiment, and all of us want to be a part of it. How does a man like Napoleon be reduced to such a miserable state for the love of a woman? How can one of the gods be torn apart for the love of a woman? It is unbelievable how primitive people who originally wrote Genesis explain the fall of the gods for earthwomen. The motivation of a god, like Napoleon, falls apart for a woman like me, Josephine. It just doesn't make any sense. Napoleon negotiated a peace treaty with Europe, but it lasted for only 3 years. In 1803, the war against England followed by a conflict with Austria and Russia. Finally, on December 2, 1804, Napoleon became the Emperor of the French at the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. Subsequently, I, Josephine, was crowned as Empress of France. I can see the ceremony, and it's a strange feeling to see yourself crowned an empress. I can see Pope Pius VII with the crown in his hand. Suddenly I see Napoleon seizing the throne out of the hands of the Pope and crowning himself. Why did he do that? Probably he wanted to show the world that the great Napoleon Bonaparte, the soul of Lialib, was not going to be subject of any papal authority. A few months later, in May 1805, Napoleon was crowned King of Italy. However, the war against England that began in 1803 was getting more complicated for Napoleon, and as a result, the Third Coalition, including England, Russia, Sweden, and Austria, was formed to fight Napoleon's ambitions. The French king then put together an army of more than 200,000 troops, ready for the invasion of England. He would call it La Grande Armée. However, Napoleon realized that the strategic situation was changing, and instead of invading England, he drove his army into the Rhine to destroy Austrian troops,
before the arrival of their Russian allies. Napoleon performed an elaborate plan and outflanked the Austrian positions and cut off the Austrian army. The Battle of Elun took place, and the Austrian army was defeated. The Elun occupation campaign is a strategic masterpiece. However, Napoleon's victory turned sour by the success attained by the British at the Battle of Trafalgar. Thanks to this victory, Britain obtained total domination of the seas for the duration of the Napoleonic Wars. Nevertheless, Napoleon's campaign continued, and he conquered Vienna. Then more glory to the French leader came with his victory in Austerlitz. This battle is considered a technical masterpiece, and it's studied and analyzed all over the world. The Battle of Austerlitz is the finest of all I have fought. I am the successor, not of Louis XVI, but of Charlemagne. The successor of Charlemagne? Napoleon was at the top of his glory. In the middle of these battles, after taking city after city, he introduced new liberties. He liberated Jews from ghettos and supported them. He was perceived so favorable to the Jews that the Russian Orthodox Church condemned him as the Antichrist, an enemy of God. How could he be the enemy of God when Napoleon was the incarnation of God himself? Yes, Napoleon was an enemy of their God because he finally understood that he was a god fighting against other gods, a war between the gods. After Austerlitz, Napoleon established a Confederation of the Rhine in the year 1806. Immediately after that, war with Prussia took off. He destroyed the Prussian forces. The battlefield is a scene of constant chaos. The winner will be the one who controls the chaos, both his own and the enemy's. Next, the Battle of Friedland took place. In a very bloody struggle, Napoleon defeated the Russians so badly that they immediately signed a peace treaty. Now, after 300 days of battles, Napoleon returned to France and returned to Josephine. Napoleon was jealous of Josephine. "Think of me, live for me, be often with your well-beloved, and be sure that there is only one misfortune that he is afraid of, that of being no longer loved by his Josephine. It is disloyal to deceive a poor husband, an affectionate lover. Ought he to lose his rights because he is far away, up to the neck in business, worries, and anxiety?" Without his Josephine, without the assurance of her love, what in the world remains for him? What will he do? To keep fighting for his love. However, was his love really in jeopardy? Were Napoleon's doubts and fears about Josephine real, or were they just in his imagination? The agreement at Tilsit gave Napoleon time to reorganize his empire and to keep the British in check. In October 17, 1807, Napoleon decided to invade Portugal, accusing them of being favorable to the British. With the cooperation of the Spanish government, Napoleon's troops crossed the Pyrenees, which was going to be one of his significant mistakes. His mistake eventually will lead to the Peninsular War, a 6-year struggle that will cripple French strength. In the summer of 1808, Napoleon appointed his brother, Joseph Bonaparte, as the new King of Spain, and the Spaniards later rebelled. Resistance to French aggression rapidly spread throughout the country. During this war, the first utilization of guerrilla warfare emerged. This guerrilla warfare dramatically disrupted the French lines of supplies and communication, and the French were never able to concentrate all of their efforts effectively. It was here when both sides committed the worst atrocities ever seen during the Napoleonic Wars. In April 1809, there was another war with Austria, and a few months later the fight against England and Holland turned sour. The Battle of the Fifth Coalition would be the Central European conflict for the next 3 years. On the more personal side, Josephine had still not given birth to a child from Napoleon, who was worried about the future of his empire without an heir. Moreover, it's here in January 1810
when Napoleon divorced Josephine. The day you say I love you less will be the end of my life. Have you stopped loving me? Sorry, love of my life. My sense of love hangs on many vast considerations, my heart entirely occupied with you. I am frustrated at not calling you by your name. Farewell, woman, tormentor of happiness, hope and love of my life. I ask you neither eternal love nor fidelity, but truth, unlimited honesty. And even now, if you love me less, you can never have loved me. I have not spent a day without loving you. I have not spent a night without enjoying you. Farewell, my angel of my happiness. Angel of my happiness. How can an angel behave as I did? Probably it was the dark side of my soul. Who knows? After his divorce from Josephine, Napoleon married the Archduchess Marie-Louise of Austria. A year later, Marie-Louise gave birth to a baby boy, but this boy will never rule the empire, because after the fall of Napoleon, the empire will no longer exist. In the same year of 1810, Napoleon's military success was fading. France suffered a string of losses that tapped the country's military budget. In June 1812, exactly June 24th, the invasion of Russia commenced. Napoleon, like Hitler after him, ignored all the advice against the invasion of Russia. His Grande Armée of more than 500,000 men went into Russia, and the Battle of Borodino was one of the bloodiest battles in history. As he once wrote, "The most terrible of all my battles was the one before Moscow. The French showed themselves to be worthy of victory, but the Russians showed themselves worthy of being invincible." The Battle of Moscow never took place because the Russians put the city on fire. Back in France there was a coup, the Malay group against Napoleon, and he decided to retreat from Russia. It was a ruinous retreat. The Grande Armée had begun as over 500,000 troops, but in the refuge fewer than 50,000 were able to return. The fighting continued over Europe, but little by little Napoleon's empire was falling apart. More battles followed, Dresden and Leipzig, and in both of them Napoleon suffered losses. After the Battle of Leipzig, the Allies offered Napoleon a peace proposal. He would remain as Emperor of France, but France would be reduced to its natural frontiers, losing the rest of his empire. Napoleon did not accept the offer, and so it was withdrawn by the Allies in December 1812. Napoleon wanted to avoid a bloody civil struggle, and 2 days later, on October 4th, Napoleon abdicated in favor of his son. However, the Allies refused this abdication under these terms, and Napoleon was then forced to announce his complete abdication 2 days later. The Allied powers declared that Emperor Napoleon was the sole obstacle to the restoration of peace in Europe. Emperor Napoleon, faithful to his oath, declares that he renounced for himself and his heirs the thrones of France and Italy. There is no personal sacrifice, even that of his life, which he is not ready to do in the interest of France. Done in the Palace of Fontainebleau, 11 April 1814. Napoleon faced exilement to the island of Elba in Tuscany, Italy. They gave him sovereignty over the island and allowed him to retain his title of emperor. However, Napoleon was ready for a return, but was France prepared for his return? Napoleon escaped from the island of Elba on February 26, 1815. 2 days later he was in the French mainland, but a request was sent to the new government to intercept him. When the soldiers approached him, Napoleon told them, "Here I am. Kill your emperor if you wish." But the soldiers responded with, "Long live the emperor." The French leader then reached Paris and governed for a period now called the 100 Days. The powers of the Congress of Vienna declared Napoleon an outlaw and put together an army of over 500,000 troops to stop Napoleon once and for all. On June 18, 1815, he was defeated by the Allies in the Battle of Waterloo. I added the numbers. 6181815 equals 30. 3 plus 0, 3. The mystical number 3 puts an end to Napoleon's empire. After returning to Paris on June 22, 1815, he abducted in favor of his son. After that, Napoleon fled, but British ships were blocking every French port, making his escape impossible. He demanded asylum, but he was imprisoned and exiled to the island of Saint Helene. The last 6 years of Napoleon's exile were sad. I can see the last day of his life. He's talking to a friend, and the friend asked him, "What did you see at the king's chamber?" Napoleon looked at him and told him, "It doesn't matter, but you will not believe me." Napoleon died on May 5, 1821, but the soul of Lialib was still alive and will be forever. I added the numbers. 5/5/1821. 5 plus 5 plus 1 plus 8 plus 2 plus 1 equals 22. 22, it couldn't be any other way. The 22-card challenge was present, and Napoleon died at the time previously established for him. My trip was over, and I needed to return to the scanning place. Lialib was waiting for me, but he didn't say anything. I couldn't say a word either. We looked at each other. "Do you understand now?" he asked me. "Yes, I do," I answered. "There is not much to discuss. Now you know the truth, and you are fully aware of everything and the importance of your role in the game," Lialib said. "Yes, I do know," I answered. "What was Napoleon's card in this game?" Lialib asked. "You, being Napoleon, made me wonder for a while. I thought that the right card would be card number 7, the card of the Emperor. However, the light played that card already and was not available. You have to play a different card then, and that's why I decided that Napoleon's card was card number 5, the Hierophant, also known as the Pope card," I answered. "Now please explain it," Lialib requested. In ancient Greece, the Hierophant was an official expounder of rites and worship of sacrifice. Also, he was an interpreter of sacred mysteries or esoteric principles, somebody who reveals and brings things to light. Napoleon, during his night in the king's chamber, was revealed secrets never known to humans previously. On the contrary to the meaning of the card, Napoleon never revealed those secrets to anybody other than Josephine, but she didn't believe him. The Hierophant, or Napoleon, have to live for the rest of his life with his secret. Hiera, meaning holy, and phanon, meaning to show in ancient Greek, mean to show the holy. However, Napoleon never showed it. He was afraid of people knowing the truth because people were not ready for it. You are Lialib, and that is Belial backwards. There is a reason for playing your role as the Pope backward. Instead of conforming to social standards, you broke all the social norms, like you did when you were Genghis Khan. The Hierophant card represents knowledge that one acquires insight, not intellectually, but instead through experience. I don't think any other card has had the idea that Napoleon had. He received the insight from the gods themselves. The Pope, or High Priest, is the male counterpart of the High Priestess. I imagine that you played an essential role during Cleopatra's time as well. It's incredible how the correlation among all the cards is gradually falling into place. Card number 5, the Hierophant, is wearing 3 elaborate vestments that represent the 3 worlds. The first world is the world of spiritual bodies that populated Earth before this era. People on Earth were pure minds. The second world is the actual world, which plays the tarot game. The third world is the world that will come when the game is over. The crown that the Pope is wearing has 3 tiers to represent past, present, and future. ambition from your history, modern wars, and wisdom for the future. A more conventional analysis of these three worlds represents the divine world to which Napoleon saw at the King's Chamber, to the intellectual world, and the physical world, all of them interconnected. Historically, the Hierophant has been chosen as a child to spend his entire life studying the sacred texts. Napoleon was selected as a child to lead his country out of chaos. He had an emotional responsibility to his people and Europe in general. Napoleon was the image of France, as the Pope is the image of the Church. The Hierophant represents the ability to connect to the highest consciousness, especially during Napoleon's night at the King's Chamber. However, Napoleon playing a reverse role in this card indicated the lack of respect for a recognized hierarchy, in this particular case, the Catholic Church, which Napoleon used at his will. Napoleon crowning himself before the Pope and not allowing him to do so shows a full reversal of the role represented by this card. The Hierophant is a symbol for rules, procedures, and structure, and Napoleon changed all these. The gray pillars depicted in the Hierophant symbolize wisdom. The 7 rounded points of the scepter represents Napoleon's vision of the 7 original gods of the rebellion. The Hierophant is card number 5, which carries the energy and freedom, change, and knowledge. Napoleon's life was a combination of these 3 things. Freedom and change were not only for his people, but for all the new subjects of his conquests through Europe. Number 5 is the number of humanity and the need to work for the human race. By giving them the freedom to achieve it in their way, to look for the right action, not simply for oneself, but society as a whole. The 2 columns depicted in the card represent law and freedom. For Napoleon, the law should be a representation of people's needs to defend their freedom from ostentation and ignorance. As he once said, "Death is nothing, but to live defeated and inglorious is to die daily." Napoleon dying on a day with the number 22 has a profound meaning. For many tarot writers, the 22 major arcana cards will represent the 22 cards of the Hebrew alphabet. There are 22 chapters in the Apocalypse of St. John, and there are also 22 chapters in the book of Revelation. Initially, the tarot cards were entrusted to hierophants to avoid foolish and ignorant people to use them as mere playthings. Napoleon, the darkness entrusted the Hierophant as the supreme ruler of the world. The illusionary universe represented in this card in the form of 2 figures kneeling before the throne upon which the Hierophant Napoleon sits illustrates the power of the Hierophant, who has achieved knowledge from a different plane of existence. It's a white and black figure, life and death, light and darkness, good and evil. Kneel before him. Napoleon saw his future taking a path and a direction he had never anticipated. Napoleon received a warning that his life and world would turn upside down, but he continued his mission for the darkness. When he became emperor, he noted, "I saw the crown of France lying on the ground, so I picked it up with my sword." Napoleon understood that there is no death, only rebirth, and a new life that will be the continuation of his life within the darkness in this game of power of death and rebirth. Napoleon did not fight death, but only practiced his acceptance. He understood that the most powerful person is one who can consciously decide when to indulge and when to walk away from indulging, without hesitation or regret. The chains that tie and bind us can be lifted and removed by confronting our inner selves and not allowing our bad decisions to take over our emotions, disempowering us to be free, I concluded. "Excellent, Myra, excellent," Laelab said. "And what is the commandment that you bring to the darkness?" Laelab asked. "Men are only moved by fear and self-interest," I answered. "Congratulations, Myra. Well said," Laelab concluded.